Imagine waking up and finding out that in just a single year, tens of thousands of your country's most vital professionals just packed up and left.
Yeah, we're talking doctors, nurses, engineers, just boarding a plane to a neighboring country to start completely over.
Right. It sounds like the premise of some dystopian novel,
Yeah.
honestly. But it's not hypothetical at all. Right now, New Zealand is experiencing this record-breaking exodus that is, well, it's entirely reshaping its future.
It really is an absolute economic warning siren. And it forces us to look past just the surface level metrics, and actually examine the structural foundation of the nation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So welcome to this deep dive. Today we are taking you right into the center of this massive, high-stakes economic rivalry unfolding right now between two really close neighbors, New Zealand and Australia.
And whether you're an economics student trying to untangle how global markets operate, or maybe you're a new immigrant weighing where to build your life, this is huge.
Or even if you're just deeply curious about how nations compete for talent in the 21st century. Because today we are unpacking a really complex question. We want to understand why Australia holds such a massive structural productivity advantage over New Zealand's core industries.
Right, and ultimately we're asking if New Zealand is destined to permanently lag behind, which is a fascinating dynamic to pull apart, really.
It is. I mean, from the outside, the international community often just lumps these two economies together, right? Like
Sure.
a single geopolitical bloc.
Oh, totally. But under the hood, they are operating on completely different engines. And right now, those engines are pulling them in very different directions.
So to figure out how these engines actually work, we've pulled together a really comprehensive stack of sources. We've got a 2024 to 2026 data report synthesizing numbers from Stats NZ, the IMF, the OECD.
The New Zealand Treasury is in there too, plus the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, and Health NZ.
Right, all the heavy hitters. We're going to uncover the hidden economic forces driving this talent shift, the geographic traps holding growth back, and the future tech solutions that could maybe flip the script.
Let's hope so.
Yeah. But, okay, let's unpack this by starting with the most immediate symptoms. Because before we dive into the deep structural macroeconomics, we kind of have to look at what regular people are actually experiencing on the ground right now.
I agree, because those massive macroeconomic numbers, they're ultimately just a reflection of millions of individual household decisions.
Right.
When a family sits around the kitchen table and decides to uproot their entire life, there is always a tangible breaking point.
And the Stats NZ data shows us exactly how many families are hitting that breaking point. It's wild. In the year ending September 2025, a staggering 72,700 New Zealand citizens left the country.
Yeah, and about 58% of them headed straight across the Tasman Sea to Australia.
Which is a net loss of around 28,000 to 30,000 people.
And to connect this to the bigger picture, you have to understand the sheer scale of that loss relative to the population. New Zealand only has about 5.1 million people.
Right. It's not a huge country.
No, so losing that many citizens translates to roughly 0.5% to 0.6% of the entire population just vanishing in a single year.
Wow.
And these aren't just random demographics either. These are prime working-age professionals. It's a severe, highly targeted brain drain of the exact people an economy needs to function.
So what does this all mean for the people leaving? Like, why are they packing up their lives? Obviously, there are some pretty powerful migration incentives drawing them towards Australian employers.
Well, the underlying driver here really comes down to a few undeniable gravity wells, I guess you could call them. First and foremost is just the wage premium.
The paycheck.
Exactly. Professionals moving to Australia are seeing a 30% to 80% increase in their weekly wages for doing the exact same job.
Wait, up to 80%. You just can't ignore that. That is generational, life-changing money for a family.
Oh, absolutely. Add to that a fundamentally stronger, more diverse job market. Plus, the fact that New Zealand citizens have automatic work rights in Australia.
Right, there's no massive visa hurdle.
Exactly. And just an overall more robust economic vibe, when the domestic economy is contracting.
And New Zealand did see a GDP contraction of about 1.1% in 2024, right? With only a really weak recovery expected in 2025.
Exactly. So that massive wage gap, it transforms from a nice-to-have luxury into an absolute necessity for families feeling that intense squeeze of high living costs.
But looking at the sources, it's not just the paycheck driving people away. There's a very specific catalyst acting as the last straw, really, and that is the healthcare system.
Yeah, the Health NZ data is honestly shocking when you look at the mechanics of it.
It really is.
Yeah.
They are short 1,700 doctors, including GPs, and over 4,800 nurses.
And because of that structural deficit, over 190,000 people are currently sitting on waitlists just for their first specialist assessments.
Just to be seen for the first time.
Uh,
And more than 40% of those people have been waiting for over 4 months.
which translates into immense societal anxiety. I mean, imagine having a chronic condition or young children and knowing you simply cannot get timely medical care.
It's terrifying.
Right. So the decision to migrate becomes less about, upgrading to a bigger house or a nicer car, and entirely about fundamental health and safety. You move to where the safety net is actually intact.
Okay, wait. I need to pause and push back on something here because I noticed a really contradictory stat in the source material regarding that exact safety net.
Oh, what's that?
Well, it says they are short nearly 5,000 nurses. But it also explicitly states that the employment rate for new nursing graduates coming out of school in New Zealand is only 47%.
Ah, right.
Like, how on earth can you have a massive critical shortage of nurses on the hospital floor, but less than half the graduates are actually getting hired? That makes zero sense.
It raises an incredibly important question, actually, and it perfectly illustrates what a compounding systemic inefficiency looks like in practice.
Okay, walk me through it.
It's a vicious cycle, really, driven by experience levels. You have your highly experienced senior medical talent bleeding out to Australia for that 80% wage premium and better working conditions.
Right, the brain drain we just talked about.
Exactly. And when those senior nurses and doctors leave, the local hospitals lose their institutional knowledge. They lose their capacity to actually train and mentor the new graduates.
Oh, I see. It's like an engine that's lost its starter motor. You have the raw fuel, the new graduates, but you don't have mechanical oversight to actually ignite them into the system safely.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it.
Yeah.
Yes, and at the exact same time, the broader economic downturn means hospital budgets are incredibly tight.
Right.
So paradoxically, you have hospital wards that are desperately short-staffed, but they literally lack the budget and the senior oversight required to safely onboard and supervise a brand new, inexperienced graduate.
Wow. So the senior talent bleeds to Australia, which then breaks the domestic training pipeline, which worsens the local hospital system.
Which in turn drives even more everyday families to emigrate because they can't get a doctor's appointment. It completely feeds itself.
It is a totally self-sustaining loop.
It is, and it forces us to look past the migration symptoms and examine the underlying mechanism. To understand why Australia can effortlessly afford to pay its workers 80% more and fund its hospitals so robustly, we have to examine the structural productivity gap.
Okay, let's get into those numbers. The OECD data reveals the core metric we're dealing with here. Australia's labor productivity sits at about $71 USD per hour,
Right.
while New Zealand is lagging a massive 30% to 40% behind that at just $51 USD per cent hour.
And what's brutal about this 30% gap is that it has absolutely nothing to do with effort.
Right. A nurse or a builder in Auckland is working 12-hour shifts and sweating just as hard as a nurse or a builder in Sydney. The deficit isn't in their work ethic.
Yeah. Exactly. Productivity, in a strict economic sense, is a measure of the value generated per hour of labor.
Okay.
It's dictated by the tools, the infrastructure, the technology, and the sheer scale of the economy surrounding that individual worker.
I always think of it like comparing a massive wholesale distributor to, like, a boutique mom-and-pop shop.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right. Like, the boutique owner might work 80 hours a week, sweating in the back room, handcrafting items one by one. They work incredibly hard.
Sure.
But the wholesaler has a fully automated warehouse with conveyor belts and algorithmic sorting, and they move 10,000 times the product per hour. It's not about the boutique owner being lazy. It's about the underlying machinery and the scale of the operation they're plugged into.
The data completely validates that analogy, too. New Zealand suffers from a geographic constraint that economists call the tyranny of distance.
Tyranny of distance.
It is incredibly far from global supply chains, making shipping and logistics inherently more expensive. Furthermore, it has a tiny domestic market of just 5.1 million people.
So there's no huge local customer base.
Exactly. Without a massive local population to sell to, businesses really struggle to achieve organic scale.
And the numbers back that up entirely. 97% of New Zealand businesses have fewer than 20 employees. They are essentially a nation of those boutique mom-and-pop shops.
And because they are so small, they struggle to attract serious foreign direct investment. The large-scale international capital needed to build massive facilities.
Right.
The result is that research and development spending is a dismal 0.3% of GDP. And the most critical metric, the capital stock per person, is only half of what it is in Australia.
Let's unpack capital stock for a second, because that term gets thrown around a lot in economics. We aren't just talking about cash sitting in a bank account somewhere, right?
No, no. Capital stock is the physical reality of the workplace. It is the specialized software, the robotic arms on an assembly line, the AI-assisted diagnostic machines in a hospital.
Like the modern fleet of tractors on a farm.
Exactly. It's the physical tools available to a worker that multiply their human effort. An Australian worker simply has twice as much machinery and technology backing up every single hour of their labor compared to a New Zealand worker.
So if New Zealand is this isolated boutique shop with limited tools, and Australia is the massive, heavily equipped wholesaler, um, what exactly are they selling?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because here's where it gets really interesting. The core export industries of these two countries are fundamentally opposed.
What's fascinating here is how Australia has built an economic juggernaut directly out of the dirt.
Out of the dirt.
Literally, it operates on a resource-backed growth model. Mining, specifically iron ore, coal, natural gas, and increasingly lithium.
Yeah.
That makes up 12% to 14% of their entire GDP and a staggering 70% of their total exports.
70% of everything they ship out is pulled from the ground. That is massive.
And mining is arguably the most capital-intensive industry on the planet. You build a billion-dollar fully automated mine in the Pilbara region, right? You have a single worker sitting in an air-conditioned control room in Perth, operating a fleet of massive autonomous drilling rigs hundreds of miles away.
Oh, wow.
The economic value generated per hour by that single worker is just astronomical. And that massive influx of wealth provides productivity dividends that ripple through the entire Australian economy.
Pushing up wages everywhere.
Exactly. Inflating wages across the board, even for jobs completely unrelated to mining.
Contrast that with the New Zealand reality. According to our data stack, mining in New Zealand accounts for just 0.75% of their GDP.
They simply do not have those massive, easily extractable mineral deposits.
Right. Instead, their economy is heavily dependent on primary industries, things that grow. Dairy alone makes up over 20% of their exports, alongside meat, forestry, and tourism.
Which exposes a really critical structural vulnerability.
How so?
Well, if you are Australia selling iron ore, your product sits in the ground, it's impervious to the weather, and your revenue is relatively stable.
Yeah, iron ore doesn't spoil in the sun.
Right. But if you are New Zealand relying on primary agriculture, your entire national income is highly vulnerable to global price fluctuations, supply chain shocks, and climate events.
Ah, I see.
A sudden drop in global milk powder prices or a severe drought in the Waikato region that can instantly wipe out a huge chunk of the country's export value.
Now, I want to pause right here and address something you see a lot if you follow the political commentary around this.
Okay.
Because when reading the headlines about New Zealand's economic stagnation, a specific narrative pops up pretty frequently. Some commentators blame this lag on progressive politics, or they point to a culture of, like, welfare laziness.
Right, right.
This idea that policies are encouraging people to just stay on unemployment rather than work. Let's look objectively at the Treasury and IMS data we have in our stack. What do the actual mechanics of the economy tell us?
It's a very common talking point, sure. But looking purely at the data provided by the New Zealand Treasury and the OECD, that narrative is soundly rejected by the math.
Okay, how so? Walk us through the numbers.
Well, it is a factual statement that the number of welfare recipients rose to about 12% to 12.5% of the working age population.
Which is around 400,000 people.
Right. However, the Treasury explicitly traces this increase back to the mechanics of the economic cycle, not some sudden shift in work ethic.
Right, so it's tied to unemployment.
Exactly. Specifically, the high unemployment rate, which is projected to peak around 5.3% to 5.5% in late 2025 or early 2026.
So the increase in welfare reliance is a direct mathematical symptom of a contracting job market, not the root cause of the economic slowdown.
Correct. Furthermore, if we look at the historical data, this 30% to 40% productivity gap with Australia has persisted for decades.
Wow, decades.
Yes. Both right-leaning conservative governments and left-leaning progressive governments have been in power during this timeline, and both have slammed into the exact same structural wall.
So it's not about who's in charge.
The fundamental issue isn't partisan policy. It is the mathematical reality of geography, a tiny domestic market, and a lack of capital-intensive mineral wealth.
That makes total sense. I mean, you can't legislate iron ore into existence under the mountains. Right?
Exactly.
So knowing that New Zealand lacks Australia's vast mineral wealth and that their core agricultural exports are deeply vulnerable to the climate, How do they compete?
Well, they cannot play Australia's game. They have to change how they farm and how they operate. And this brings us to the potential lifeline outlined in the research, the Fourth Industrial Revolution, or 4IR.
Ah, the tech lifeline. We're talking about AI, automation, the Internet of Things. Can digital transformation actually bridge a 40% structural productivity gap by 2030?
It has the potential to act as the ultimate equalizer, honestly.
Really?
Yeah, the vision detailed in the reports is a shift toward agriculture 4.0. And this isn't just a buzzword, it changes the physical mechanics of farming entirely.
Give me an example. What does that look like?
Imagine a dairy farm utilizing AI-driven milking systems. Instead of just extracting milk, the system uses biometric sensors to analyze the health and nutrient needs of each individual cow in real time.
Optimizing the yield and reducing disease.
Exactly. Or imagine utilizing automated drone swarms for hyper-precise crop monitoring.
Hmm.
You're only spraying fertilizer exactly where an algorithm detects a deficiency, rather than just blanketing a whole field.
So you are essentially shifting from traditional labor-heavy farming to operating a highly optimized, high-tech biological manufacturing plant.
That's a great way to put it. If New Zealand can leverage its already strong, clean, green, global brand reputation and physically integrate this cutting-edge green food tech, they can transform their biggest vulnerability into a highly defensible, high-value premium export.
That's huge.
And additionally, their grid is heavily powered by renewable energy. That makes them a highly attractive destination for global tech giants looking to build green data centers.
I love the vision. It sounds incredible. But let me hit you with a reality check based on the numbers you gave me earlier.
Okay, hit me.
If I'm a small family farmer, I am totally stuck. You said 97% of New Zealand companies have fewer than 20 people, and their capital stock is incredibly low. How on earth does a tiny mom-and-pop dairy farm afford a $1 million AI drone fleet or a robotic milking parlor? They can't survive without the tech, but they can't afford to buy it.
Exactly.
The only way out of that trap seems to be either selling out to a massive multinational corporation or the government stepping in to completely change the rules of the game.
This raises the single most important bottleneck in the entire 4IR scenario. The technology already exists, but the diffusion of that technology throughout the economy is blocked by the lack of scale and upfront capital.
Because a family farm just cannot buy an AI data center.
Right. That is where specific, aggressive policy changes are required to improve investment and innovation.
So how do you physically change the rules to fix that?
First, the government must prioritize the creation of agritech clusters.
Agritech clusters.
Yeah, this involves creating legal and economic frameworks where small, independent farms can pool their resources, form specialized co-ops, and share access to this expensive 4IR technology. You artificially construct the scale they lack individually.
Oh, I see. You group the boutiques together so they can afford to buy the wholesalers' machinery.
Exactly. Second, they need to aggressively attract foreign direct investment specifically targeted at the tech sector to fund this infrastructure.
Makes sense.
And third, they have to completely overhaul the red tape. The sources specifically highlight reforming the Resource Management Act, or the RMA.
How does the RMA actually block innovation, though?
Think about the mechanics of building infrastructure. Right now, if our newly formed dairy co-op wants to build a localized green data center to process all the biometric data coming from their drone swarms,
Yeah.
the RMA might trap them in a 3-year environmental review process before they can lay a single brick. Cutting that red tape means taking innovation from the drawing board to the field in months, not years.
Okay, so taking all of this in, the staggering migration numbers, the structural differences between mining dirt and milking cows, the bottlenecks in capital, and the potential of drone fleets and AI clusters.
It's a lot of moving parts.
It really is. Where does this actually leave New Zealand's long-term economic trajectory compared to Australia? Our sources map out a timeline of what the future looks like depending on what actions are taken.
They do. Looking at the immediate data from the IMF and OECD, the next couple of years, say out to 2026 or 2027, are going to be a slow, difficult grind.
Yeah, it's a low grind.
GDP is expected to slowly recover, growing somewhere between 1.8% and 2.7%.
But 2% growth isn't going to suddenly close an 80% wage gap.
It won't. And because that wage gap will remain stubbornly wide in the short term, the massive talent migration to Australia will continue.
And the healthcare crisis.
The waitlist will persist unless radical, immediate triage reforms occur. It's essentially an economy treading water.
Treading water while your best talent keeps swimming away. That's bleak. But what happens if we look further out? Fast forward to 2030.
2030 is the make-or-break crossroads for the digital transformation. If New Zealand successfully executes those policy changes,
So if they cut the RMA red tape, build those agri-tech clusters, and attract the FDI needed to deploy Agriculture 4.0,
right. If they do that, they begin a trajectory of high-quality, sustainable growth. They start to meaningfully close the income gap with Australia.
and the flip side, what if the red tape stays, the mom-and-pop farms get left behind, and the tech just doesn't diffuse?
Then the structural traps tighten. They face a severe compounding skills shortage. The educated talent leaves, and what little automation does arrive will likely squeeze out low-end manual labor without replacing it with high-tech roles.
Which just drastically widens domestic inequality.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the long-term view, the Treasury modeling looking out to 2050. The ultimate question of this deep dive, is New Zealand destined to permanently lag behind?
Well, the institutional foundation of the country is too strong for it to completely collapse into developing nation status. I mean, they have a strong rule of law and low corruption.
Right, as a stable democracy.
But they face a very real mathematical risk of sliding permanently into the lower tier of developed nations.
Oh.
The Treasury's modeling is stark. They calculate that just a sluggish 0.5% ongoing productivity growth rate would cumulatively cost the New Zealand economy $37 billion NZD.
$37 billion in lost potential. That is a staggering penalty for an economy of that size.
The winning trajectory, the way to avoid that $37 billion penalty requires a fundamental psychological shift.
What do you mean?
New Zealand has to accept that it will never match Australia's massive resource scale. You cannot beat a mining giant at an extraction game when you don't have the minerals.
Right.
Instead, New Zealand must pivot entirely, leveraging its green brand to become the world's highly profitable, high-tech, sustainable boutique.
So let's synthesize this journey. New Zealand's current struggles, the empty hospital wards, the 190,000 people waiting for care, the tens of thousands of professionals packing up for Brisbane or Sydney.
Yeah.
It's not just a temporary bad economic cycle. It is a deep structural issue tied to the physical geography of the country, the small scale of its businesses, and a historic lack of capital machinery.
And all of that is magnified when placed next to the sheer brute economic force of Australia's massive mining wealth.
But the diagnosis is far from terminal. If they implement the right policy changes, the Fourth Industrial Revolution offers a highly specific blueprint to turn their small-scale and green reputation from a vulnerability into a premium global strength.
Exactly. It's about working smarter, not harder.
It really leaves you with something to ponder. Because when you strip it all away, we are looking at two neighboring nations making two totally different bets on what the future values most.
A fascinating divergence.
Truly. So I want to leave you with this final question to think about. If Australia's current economic superpower comes from extracting what is under the ground, and New Zealand's future survival depends entirely on optimizing the sustainable technology of what grows on it, well, when the AI revolution fully takes over the global economy in the coming decades, will the 21st century ultimately reward the extractor or the cultivator? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the numbers behind the headlines, and we'll catch you next time.